what happens when AI hype collides with the day-to-day work on the front line. Well, today I'm joined by the Managing Director and Partner at Boston Consulting Group, or BCG as it's better known. He's in Singapore, where he leads the Human Futures Lab within the BCG Henderson Institute. And he works with governments and global enterprises on some of the workforce development and reskilling. So I've invited him on here today to bring fresh data from BCG's AI at Work study and explain why frontline usage appears to have stalled around the halfway mark. What does this mean? Why is it only a quarter of employees feeling real leadership support right now? And why just over a third are satisfied with their AI training? So we're going to explore the gap between enthusiasm and actual adoption, the risks of shadow AI, and the simple policy guardrails that every company needs to be doing before scaling those AI tools. So from upskilling everyone on use cases and workflows to reskilling at scale. So if you're planning your 2026 roadmap, this conversation will centre on skills, culture, and measurable outcomes, rather than shiny technology and marketing slogans. So if you're ready to turn AI from a slide into a habit, you should love this one. So let me get my guest on right now. So welcome to the show. Can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are and what you do?
Thank you, Neil, for inviting me. I'm Sagar Goel. I'm a managing director and partner at BCG from our Singapore office. I work with a lot of clients globally, especially governments around the world, on the topic of workforce development and reskilling. That's a personal purpose as well as an area of passion for me, Neil. I wear another hat. I lead our Human Futures Lab as part of BCG Henderson Institute, which is BCG's strategy think tank. Beyond work, Neil, I'm a father to a 8-year-old, husband, and also a proud paw parent of a 4-month-old puppy.
Oh, man. So you're incredibly busy, and a 4-month-old puppy. I know that the training there and waking up in the night and the toilet training, it's like having a little baby, isn't it?
Very much like that. So still going through the tough period at the moment.
I love it. So who's getting up, you or your wife? Who's getting up at that 2-3 a.m. when the puppy is crying?
I'm not going to lie. It's my wife doing a lot of the hard work. I do take turns sometimes.
Love it. Well, a quick shout out to your wife there. And one of the reasons I invited you on here today was to talk about the recent BCG research that actually shows entry-level AI usage has stalled for the first time. And there is so much hype for the last 3 years around AI. I've got to ask, what does this signal about how companies are introducing AI into their workforce? What are you seeing here?
It was certainly an interesting finding, Neil, when we concluded this study called AI at Work at BCG. And what we found was the frontline usage of AI is stalling at about roughly 51%. And we have several hypotheses on why this is the case. Firstly, companies are thinking about this from, I would say, the tools angle, but not so much from what does it mean for the actual employee? How do they think about really adopting it in their everyday workplace? And what are some of the guardrails of how they're supposed to use or not use some of these AI tools? I think it really starts with that. But I would say beyond that, there are certainly lessons from the leadership support that's required. We heard that only 25% of the frontline employees are really feeling that leadership support and role modeling when it comes to AI adoption. And finally, I would say training is a big component. And only 36% of the frontline employees that we surveyed, Neil, were really satisfied by it. So we see that there's a lot that companies need to do in terms of really preparing the frontline employees to understand how to adopt this and make it part of their everyday. Finally, what we are also seeing from some other research is people are not necessarily using this at work in the right places. A study with ChatGPT showed that majority of ChatGPT usage today, about 70% of all the usage, is focused on non-work related And a lot of the use cases are around, more information gathering, administrative uses, some creative tasks. So I would say net, there is just a lot of untapped potential of how these AI tools can be used back at work. If number one, companies think of the right framing, number two, providing the leadership support, and number three, the training that has to go along with it.
And interestingly, the report also highlights that leaders are more worried than junior staff about their jobs disappearing across the next decade. So why do you think that is? Is it the old economics of less people to lead, less leaders that are required? What's the thinking behind this?
Yeah, we did see that difference. About 36% of frontline said that they feel their jobs might be potentially at risk, versus for managers and leaders, that number was around 43%. To me, that's not really very surprising, Neil. And why do I say that? Firstly, if you think about the role of leaders and managers, they are really ahead in terms of the understanding and the awareness of the structural shifts in the market and in the business, how AI can disrupt their business model and what does it mean for them. So their level of awareness is much heightened. And secondly, they might be more late stage in their career. So their own level of preparation and readiness to reskill and retrain might also be relatively lower compared to frontline. So for a combination of those reasons, the leaders really understanding the shifts and how that's coming to them and their own initial mindset, that we see some of this sentiment around higher degree of managers and leaders feeling that their jobs might be at risk. But from what we know and are seeing from some of the early data, we do see an indication that we might have more impact, especially on entry level roles, as AI and agentic AI can help automate. And we will see a clearer shift towards more adoption of AI, especially in those entry level roles, and the need for the frontline staff to pivot to more augmented roles with a higher degree of tasks that they have to do.
And another phrase that I'm hearing repeatedly over the last few months is shadow AI, spreading very quickly with many employees using tools without authorization. They can use whatever tool that they want, whether it be ChatGPT, Gemini, Anthropic. There's so many different models out there that they can use on their own devices. So how should companies balance innovation with risk when it comes to these unofficial tools? Because we've kind of been here before with BYOD and when SaaS tools appeared on the radar without IT knowing about it. We've been here many times before, but what should they be doing this time around when the risks are possibly somewhat higher?
I would echo that last point that you mentioned, Neil. In this case, the risks could be quite significant to companies. My personal take on this problem is companies need to be very clear on what are the governance models and policies on what tools can and cannot be adopted by their employees and how they want their employees to use some of these tools. The last thing companies also want is have confidential documents being uploaded on open source or open LLMs that can then have some of this confidential data out in the market. So my view on this, Neil, is straightforward. Yes, you have to drive innovation, but can it first come with clarity around communication and policies by the company on how they want their employees and where they want their employees to use AI?
And another surprise for me was that the data showed that the US is lagging behind other regions in AI adoption. So, question I have to ask here on behalf of my US listeners, what cultural or structural factors might explain this slower uptake compared to the global South? Because I go to many, many conferences across the US this year and previous years, and all I hear about is AI. So this surprised me a little.
I see where you're coming from, Neil. And our data actually showed that the share of employees who use AI several times a week is indeed lower in the US compared to the global average. So in the US, it's about 64% of the share of employees versus a global average of 72%. I mean, there's some difference, but not a whole lot of difference. The way I would explain this difference and lower uptake in the US is more a function of just the maturity of the market and the labor market policies in the US or a more developed economy in the US, where there is a clear narrative point of discussion, whether it's in the public discourse or within the companies, around what is the use of AI and how do we do it responsibly, or rather in a more responsible way. Versus if you think about the global south, where some of the markets are less mature and the opportunities are fewer and far in between. Let's take, Neil, for example, a market like India. And we're talking about 16% youth unemployment rates in that country. So it does mean that the youth, and we do see Gen Z and millennials are actually much higher adopters of AI. So this comes naturally to them, and they also see this as start seeing this as a differentiator for themselves in the job market. So it's a question of, in the global south, where opportunities are fewer and the number of people who want to take up those opportunities are significantly in multiples, you will see more higher adoption. You will see some of the early trends around adoption in the global south.
And I also read that you've argued that reskilling is the linchpin of AI adoption, and I couldn't agree more there. So what does an effective reskilling program look like, especially for business leaders listening, that this is high on their radar too? And how should they as leaders be approaching designing one? Where should they begin?
It's a great question. Let me start by providing a distinction between what I talk about reskilling and then what is upskilling. The two are actually different and both are important in the context of AI. Let's start with upskilling. With the whole opportunity of AI and Gen AI in front of us, we need to educate and upskill all our employees, right from the CEO down to the front line, on where are the important use cases for the organization? How do we drive the adoption? How do we actually embed it in our workflows to truly get value from it? This is what I call upskilling, and it needs to be really embedded in the day-to-day learning, not just formal learning in terms of 1 or 2 day training or workshops or online modules. It has to be embedded in the everyday, day-to-day learning. The other part of the equation is reskilling. At the same time, we are going to see, because of higher adoption of AI and agentic AI, a significant impact where we estimate about 1 in 3 employees globally in the next 5 years seeing their jobs significantly impacted. Those employees, Neil, they have to reskill. And then we find ways to redeploy them into more in-demand job roles. Reskilling is definitely a lot more intensive when it comes to training, and it's beyond training, it's change management. And this is where companies who are doing it well, and we did a global study around this on 40 reskilling innovators, and we found some of the success factors are where companies are actually making reskilling part of their business strategy. IKEA, when it actually deployed AI in its customer service department, reskilled 8,000 customer or call center employees into interior design consulting, which is now a new business for them. So that makes a lot of business sense. At the same time, they thought about how do we redeploy part of their workforce. That's a win-win for everyone. Similarly, thinking about how do we make this a top executive mandate. Much like, Neil, any business initiative is led top down. We have to think of both upskilling and reskilling being monitored and measured right from the top.
And another big stat here from the research is only a third of employees say that they're satisfied with the level of AI training that they've received. I suspect many have had none at all. So what are companies getting wrong here, and how can they start fixing this? Because the success of any new technology when it's rolled out across an organization is so dependent on the culture within an organization, and that adoption requires training and acceptance and all those things. So what's going wrong here?
And we see this story play out time and again. One example, we were working with a software company in North America when we did the first survey to understand the sentiment of this new AI tool that we wanted the software engineers to adopt to drive more automation in coding and more efficiency and productivity in coding. Guess what? 75% of the software developers and engineers told us, this is fantastic. We are very, very excited about that. But when it actually came down to adopting these new tools, it was only 25% of them really doing that in a meaningful way. That's quite a stark difference between what's the perception and the reality on the ground. And I would break it down into the why, what, and how companies need to think of this differently. The why is really starting from why are we doing this? Why do we need our software engineers or our customer service staff or our frontline staff, whoever we're talking about, adopt these new AI tools? What's in it for them? This can't be, Neil, just a productivity conversation, which is where companies are missing the point. This is an opportunity for companies to actually bring more enjoyment back to work, where AI or Gen AI can be used to automate away some of the work that is perceived as toil by the employees versus joy. And also as an opportunity for companies to help their employees think about how this will improve their efficiency and effectiveness at work, which is beyond productivity. It is also quality of their work. It is more time for them to build mastery of their skills, especially the human-centric skills, which are becoming much, much more important. So that's the why of how companies need to think of this differently and make it very much co-created with their employees. The second part is the what, which is what skills are important. And here, the challenge that I'm seeing is companies focusing a lot on more of the technical skills. But as I mentioned, this is beyond just the core technical skills. The core critical skills are becoming more and more important. For instance, the ability of an individual to actually frame the business problem, understand what are the pain points and the friction points I'm solving for, is the first step, not the tool or the technology. So this skill of identifying what are the problem statements and how do I then bring the technology solution to it, part one. And part two, how do I redesign my workflows? How do I make this new AI tool part of my everyday work life? And part three, drive the adoption and the change management. And this is where the how part also comes in. We can't think of this as being one day training or a few hours of online module that at best gives us some basics of how to use these tools. But companies need to think of the long tail of change management to drive the adoption of these new tools. So really, companies who want to do this well and succeed and have their employees satisfied and they get the business results have to rethink their why, what, and how of upskilling.
And I'm curious, through all your work with BCG's Human Features Lab and all the conversations that you get privileged to have there, you explore industry, government and academia and how they can all come together on the skills crisis. So I've got to ask, from your point of view here and everything that you're seeing and hearing, what models of collaboration excite you the most right now?
I'm a firm believer that upskilling and reskilling at scale, where we're talking about millions of people globally every year who need to be upskilled and reskilled, it is going to take a village, Neil, which means that individuals, companies, industry associations, NGOs, governments, all of them need to work in tandem if we were to solve this challenge at scale. We talk about the half-life of skills, which is now at 5 years, which means every 5 years, half of your skills becoming redundant. This is a huge problem that no one stakeholder could solve. What I'm seeing as more interesting and innovative collaboration models that are emerging that get me excited are when companies are not competing, but collaborating together to find and get the right talent that they need. Let me give you a few examples. Here in Singapore, where I'm based, more than 20 plus banks and financial services companies have gotten together, stating we all have a common challenge of attracting technical talent into banks. So instead of competing for those limited talent in the market, they work together to create a program along with IBF, which is the Association for Financial Services Skilling Work here in Singapore. They collaborated to create a common program to help individuals move from traditional operational job roles, maybe with no banking experience, and get reskilled into technical roles into banks. That to me is a fantastic example. We've also seen this in the US, in the auto sector in Michigan, for instance, where different companies coming together and the government being, or rather playing an orchestrator role as well. These models where companies are actually collaborating versus competing for talent, I think are the future models where we will see new approaches to solve the skilling crisis at scale with measurable impact.
And finally, if you were advising a CEO that could be listening to this podcast and they're located anywhere in the world, what would be the most important step that you'd recommend that they take right now to prepare their workforce for that inevitable AI-driven future? We're seeing a few early indications of what that might look like now, but what steps should CEOs be taking now, especially as we're, just a few months away from 2026?
I would start by saying that if skills don't show up on your balance sheet, they won't show up in your P&L. It's as simple as that. As CEOs, if you are not upstream thinking about what is the impact of the workforce and the new skills that you need, or the existing skills that you have untapped today, and link them upfront to your business strategy, I feel that's a huge loss of opportunity. And we all know that your strategy is going to be as good as your skills. So my message or the first step would be think of how do you identify the implications and the impact on your workforce and your skills right upstream as part of your business strategy.
And I think that is a beautiful moment to end on today. But I'm conscious we've mentioned a lot around the BCG research that we've referenced throughout our conversation today. Anyone listening want to find out more information about that or just connect with you or your team, where do you like to point everyone? Where's the best starting point?
The easiest way to reach out to me and my team, Neil, is to ping me on LinkedIn. You can look me up, Sagar Goel, on LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to connect with you and share more about our research.
Well, thank you so much for sitting down with me today. We've covered a lot of the big topics that a lot of leaders are talking about right now around everything from jobs disappearing, reskilling, upskilling, shadow AI, cultural and structural factors that are all being put into play here as well. I'd love to hear what people listening are thinking, but more than anything, thank you for starting this conversation today. Such a timely topic, and thank you for your time.
Thank you for inviting me. I had fun having this conversation with you. Take care, Neil.
It was so refreshing to talk with my guest today, who has a grounded playbook for building real capability, not just buying new tools. And his message was quite clear. Treat skills as a balance sheet item, not just a side project. Pair clear policies with everyday workflow changes so adoption starts sticking. And design for both upskilling across the company and deeper reskilling where roles will inevitably shift. And then measure progress like you measure any other strategic initiative. And for everyone listening, what will you change first in your training approach, in your policies, or the way that you track AI adoption and outcomes? Tell me what your plan is. What are you going to try next and why? techblogwriteroutlook.com, LinkedIn, X, Instagram, just at Neil C. Hughes. We can carry this conversation on. But that's it for today, so I will speak with you all tomorrow. Bye for now.